Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Harry Sherrard. On behalf of the Talks team, very warm welcome to our event this evening. So you all know why you're here. So without further ado, can I welcome to the stage, please, Mr. Crispian Besley. Crispian, as we all know, when it comes to crime linked to motorsport, there's one big question. Was Bernie Ecclestone behind the Great Train Robbery? and what does he say when he's asked that question?
Well, he has been asked that question many, many times. And he's always said, no, mate, it's far too small a job for me.
So going back to the Great Train Robbery, of course, the Roy James, who we just mentioned, was the getaway driver, the principal getaway driver, but of course an up-and-coming racing driver at the same time.
Well, he absolutely was an up-and-coming racing driver. He hadn't actually raced cars for very long. No. It was his first season of car racing, and he was racing at Brabham Formula Junior. He was a good sportsman. He actually had a test or trial for QPR in football. He was a talented all-rounder. He then got into go-karting, found his forte and decided to go motor racing. But he had another career as well, which was as a cat burglar. Yeah. But before that, he had trained as a silversmith, and he was a very skilled silversmith.
Yeah, and we'll come back to his silversmithing in a little bit. So he got involved in the gang then that were involved in the Great Train Robbery. Yeah. And the prize for him, of course, was cash to fund his newly found passion for motorsport.
Absolutely right, yeah. But it's a bit of a fallacy that he was a lot of what you might have read suggests he was a getaway driver. He was mad keen, as crooks of that genre, that era were, on Mark 1 and 2 Jags. And in fact, he stole Mike Hawthorne's Mark 1 Jag outside the steering wheel club. For another job. This is before the Great Train Robbery. Yeah. Returned it.
He returned it, yes.
But without the BRDC badge on the front,
yeah.
which he subsequently did return after Mike had died. But the fallacy is that he was the lead driver and that he drove away as bandits did in those days in his Mark II Jag. He didn't. He was very pissed off about it because the chosen getaway cars were Land Rovers. And he drove one of those.
Right, so. Okay. So he got away, obviously, with a certain amount of cash and began racing again. And he was then racing down at Goodwood, but the net was tightening. And the police then launched a raid to come down and try to arrest him actually at Goodwood.
Absolutely right. Well, it was actually very well publicised. You know, the police had put out, wanted in connection with da-da-da. So his picture was all over the front pages.
It seems incredible that being the case, he actually went ahead and actually entered the race.
Well, you've got to bear in mind this is pre-internet days, So the police checked with Goodwood that he was on the list, on the entry list. He was tipped off. They'd been tipped off. He was tipped off after qualifying.
Yeah.
And you couldn't write it, but it happened. It genuinely happened. He left, not in a Mark 1 or Mark 2, but in his E-Type Jaguar.
White E-Type Jaguar.
Exactly. And he was literally, you've raced at Goodwood, I've raced at Goodwood lots of times. You know what the setup is there.
Yeah.
He literally had turned out of the gate as Detective Slipper and all these Wolseley's were black in those days, flashing lights. And they got there and obviously...
It's like a scene from an Ealing comedy. He's heading out as fast as he can with E-Type Jaguar and the police with all the bells coming. They're coming in the opposite direction to Goodwood to arrest him. But of course he gave them the slip.
He did. He gave Slipper the slip.
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
And he was the first of the crew to go down. They arrested him. Eventually, they went to his garage lock-up garage in Battersea in London. Found the car and the mechanic there, but no sign of him. They got him. As I say, he was the first guy to go down. He came out. Very nearly went down again for a VAT fraud, got away with it, and subsequently went down for another robbery. Sorry, not for a robbery. He married a very young bride and had a couple of children. She was an alcoholic, and there was issues over custody of the children. His father-in-law came round to the flat in Fulham, and Roy pulled a gun on him and shot him several times.
But he also went back to his original profession of silversmithing, and he had one particularly prominent customer.
Which was, joining the dots up, Bernie Ecclestone.
Bernie Ecclestone.
So Bernie knew him, as I said before. So the first thing he did when he came out of prison after the Great Train Robbery was go to various people like Bernie, who by that time, or at that time, owned the Brabham Formula One team. He went to Graham Hill, who had just set up his own Formula One team, and they both said, worst effect, you're far too old, age 42, whatever you are, to be a racing driver. But Bernie did give him a job, bear in mind his profession, his legal profession of being a silversmith, and gave him a job to make the F1 trophy. Not, again, it's a fallacy that went round that he made the world, the driver's trophy. He didn't. It was the trophy given to the best organised Grand Prix. And these people every year went to a different organiser. These people got it over the course of several years. No one realised who had made it, but it was Roy James.
And so, yeah, so the story then ended obviously at that point in terms of James, but Bernie continues to deny that he actually was in any way involved with the actual planning and the execution of it.
He continues to deny that, and it would be unwise of me to write otherwise. But
of course, yeah.
But the guy's 90-something. He's not going to sue somebody. You only sue people who've got money, and I have no money left. So he's not going to sue me. But a lot of people have said, why isn't there a chapter on Bernie Ecclestone on there? Is it because you're worried about being sued? No, I'm not. The reason is because he's never, until recently,
yes,
he's never been convicted of anything.
Yeah.
He's been a huge part of the sport and Formula One. There is actually, for those aficionados who want to see Bernie written about, there is a chapter, and I know you won't know talk about it, but on a guy called Gerhard Grabowski, who no one probably have ever heard of, but he was an investment banker who accepted a bribe from Bernie Ecclestone over the change in ownership to CVC, who are a private equity group, and he took a bribe of 40 million quid from him, went to court in Germany, was convicted, went to prison, and at that court hearing in Germany was one Bernard Ecclestone, because he was the guy
he'd paid the bribe.
3 years later, he goes back to the very same courtroom, and some of you may have seen it on television at the time. Bernie was pretending to be an even older man than he was then, and goes through the revolving doors in the courtroom and goes around several times, which was excruciatingly embarrassing. But that's just Bernie play acting. Anyway, he same courtroom, because he was the guy, obviously, 3 years later, who'd given the bribe. And he wasn't convicted. He wasn't found guilty or not guilty.
I think he paid a big fine, didn't he?
He paid $100 million fine, which is a bit like plea bargaining in the States. So he got off that. So up until that point, and until for many years later, he hadn't been convicted of anything. Hence, the chapter is really about him, not Gerhard Grabowski. But in Volume 2, which is not on sale yet because I haven't written it, there will be a chapter on Bernie Ecclestone, and because of the recent...
finally, having sailed so close to the wind for so many years, he finally was convicted a few years ago.
Not that long ago, it was probably less than 2 years ago, I think, but and he's paid the biggest fine to the Inland Revenue in history. So Bernie Ecclestone has won himself a place in Volume 2 of Driven to Crime.
So we just were talking about being sued for saying things that were perceived as being out of turn, which sort of neatly takes us to a gentleman that I think many audience might remember from a few years ago, which is Jean-Marie Balest, the previous president of FIA. So we've quite a controversial FIA president at the moment, but we seem to have had a run over the decades of controversial FIA presidents. So Balest tried to cover up his Nazi past. That was the main issue with him, and sued anybody that actually published the fact that he was in the SS.
He came post-war. He set up a publishing company. So he was big in the publishing world and published various well-known French newspapers and magazines. And so he knew his way around, and there were many people who were very pissed off that he was awarded the Legion d'Honneur, one of the highest accolades in France, for his wartime exploits, which were, as you say, very dodgy.
Yeah.
He claimed to be part of the French resistance, and as time went on, certainly by the 70s, and there's a photograph in the book, I think,
There is, yeah.
of him dressed as an SS officer. So he was in the SS, but absolutely right, Harry. He sued anybody who, and never lost, by the way, never lost a case.
Yeah.
But they were always Pyrrhic victories because he was never awarded any damages. So he shut people up.
Yeah.
But of course he had, so that was the main reason for writing that quite short chapter on him.
Yeah.
He was part of the SS and in the war. There's a connection with another.
I was going to come on that.
Okay.
Just to close that one off, of course, you can't libel or defame a dead person. So as everybody had these photographs archived, and as soon as Ballester died, everybody started publishing the pictures of him in the SS uniform, and the truth actually came out then because he wasn't around to be defamed anymore.
Yeah. I could do with a few more people in that book dying.
Yeah. So Ballester then lost the election to one Max Mosley, another controversial character, as we said, who arguably, I guess you could say, became the victim of crime rather than the perpetrator of it.
Yeah, I mean, there are. It's a good point to make. There are in the book there are several victims of crime. The connection, though, just going back to Bless, the connection is the Nazi aspect, because his father, as I'm sure most of you will know, was Sir Oswald Mosley, who was incarcerated with his wife, Dinah Mitford. Dinah Mosley was incarcerated in World War II for a large part of the war for their connections with Hitler. Hitler actually went to their wedding. But that didn't make Mosley a criminal, of course. It might still have qualified him to be in the book. He was a victim of crime, as you rightly say, by the News of the World, who, in my view, and I make it very clear in the book, is whatever your sexual proclivities are, what you do behind closed doors is entirely up to you. And the News of the World suggests there was a Nazi element to the orgies he was having with various hookers. And whether that was true or not, he managed to effectively close down the News of the World, and that was one of his life great successes.
But it was an extraordinary defiance that he put up. I mean, how many CEOs or businessmen or politicians can you imagine could actually have kept their careers on track, faced with those, well, as you said, the Nazi side of it was an allegation that was ultimately unproven, but the photographs and the activity was certainly clear for all to see. But it's incredible how he actually kept his career on track in light of all of that.
Yeah, most people's careers depend on being paid, and he came from an exceptionally wealthy family, and was able to finance other people in their actions against News of the World and all the telephone scandals. So, but you're right. His career as FIA president actually achieved a great deal in terms of motor car safety, and not just for racing cars.
Yeah, particularly after the Senna accident, he put forward a lot of safety measures.
That was in Formula One, but he did a lot more in terms of safety for the cars that most of us drive as well.
So if we move on then to talk about a racing driver called Blakeney, who features briefly in a movie called Dance with a Stranger. Anybody know where we're going with this? Who featured in Dance with a Stranger?
So I often ask people, do you know who the last woman to be hanged? And I think there's probably the demographic here. Sorry? Yeah, okay. So, but people, maybe slightly younger demographic, have not a clue.
Yeah.
One of my sons is here. Probably never heard of her. But the chapter really is about Ruth Ellis, but the reason she went down was for murdering her lover in cold blood outside, and premeditated, outside a pub in North London. But the point was, absolutely, as you say, her lover, who was a very unpleasant piece of work, and she had a very bad life before she'd even met him, but he'd recently beaten her up. He'd
beaten her up badly. I mean, not
badly she lost the baby that she was carrying for him. And she was paranoid for lots of reasons. She was drugged up, she was drunk. In today's terms, of course, she wouldn't be hung because we don't have a death penalty anymore. But she probably would be, given a very short sentence.
A psychiatrist would have said she was mentally disturbed. And
I think, reading and doing the research I did, she was absolutely that. She would be treated with much greater sensitivity now. But she shot David Blakely, who was a racing driver, who came from an equally dysfunctional background, but albeit on the other side of the track. She came from a very humble background. He came from a very well-moneyed background, hence why he raced cars. But it's as you say, articulated in that film, probably far better than I have done in the book. But it's a good but a sad story, and historically important because it led to the abolition of hanging for women, and ultimately, I think about 10 years later actually, but the abolition of hanging. Full stop. Yeah, so.
And in the book, of course, because Blakeney was a racing driver and was again working his way up the ladder.
Yeah.
An extraordinary part of that story is, of course, Cousins, who was her friend, who gave her the gun, took her to the woods, showed her how to fire a gun, drove her to near the pub where Blakeney was, and dropped her off.
Yeah.
But yet there was never any action taken. He was an accomplice at the very least.
It was extraordinary. The police saw it as an open and shut case because there was an off-duty policeman outside the pub who saw her do it, who took the gun away from her. She never questioned the fact. She never tried to suggest she wasn't guilty. She clearly was. She was given the opportunity to say that it was a crime of passion or whatever it was, but she didn't want to do that. She actually wrote a letter to Blakely's mother apologising for it and saying, I deserve to die, I've taken a life, and therefore my life should be taken as well. But it was a genuinely sad, very sad story. And Desmond Cousin, as you touched on, was not a lover, but was more of an avuncular figure. He wanted to be her lover, paid for her children to go to private school, put a roof over her head, and wanted, he'd inherited money as well. He wanted his rival out of the way, and ultimately he should have been prosecuted for being not just an accessory, but actually the instigator of that murder.
Probably first degree, because as we said, he
absolutely
supplied the weapon and trained her on how to fire it.
Everything,
yeah. So a case then, much more recently than that people may be less familiar with because it all took place in France, and you used the phrase there, a crime of passion. So we had a Formula One team formed by Gerard Larousse, that a lot of people would know, ex-Renault and ex-Ligier, put together a new team with Didier Calmel, who, in the course of a crime of passion, used a shotgun to kill his wife.
Yeah. So he was, so as you say, Larousse was a very well-known rally and race driver, won Le Mans a couple of times, even had 2 outings, I think, with the Brabham BT42 in Formula One, wasn't very successful, moved into team management, as you say, with Renault, first through their engine program, then with Ligier, and met a guy called Didier Calmels through a driver, Philippe Alliot, and that's relevant to what subsequently happened. They between them decided they want to start another national,
French Formula One team.
F1 team. Larousse had the knowledge, the expertise from an engineering perspective, a racing perspective. Calmels was a lawyer and a very successful businessman, and played the part of funding it and So, and it was not very successful. I mean, by the end of it, they'd won. Over a period of several years after Calmels went down, which we'll come back to, they'd only scored 1 podium ever. Otherwise, it was in the days when points were scored in Formula One down from 1st to 6th place, they got a couple of 5th place. So it wasn't very successful. He was married, Didier Calmels was married to a very good-looking girl who he'd met at law school. They had 4 children. He was becoming increasingly distant because of all his business interests, not least the Formula One team, and she admitted that she had found a lover. And he decided at the end of that year he would take more time out and concentrate on his family. There was an evening at their Paris apartment where her mother, his mother-in-law, came round, alcohol-fueled argument, at which point she said, I've been seeing him again. And he took out his shotgun, she used for hunting, and threatened to kill himself. And she said, you don't have the courage to do so. Mm-hmm. And he shot her. He
shot her dead, yeah. Incredible. But we know this sort of legendary thing in France, this crime of passion, which obviously that very much fell into. And, I mean, he received an extraordinarily short sentence. I think he was sentenced for 6 years, but was released after 2.
Yep. Well, he was... The prosecution, not surprisingly, even though, as you rightly say, it's crime passionnel, or they call it in France, but tried to make it much longer. It was, as you say, 6 years. He was allowed out, I think even shorter than that. He was allowed, rather than going to an open prison, he was allowed to go back to the office. And then he'd check in for his supper and be locked up at night. It was extraordinary. Part of that was because he was very well connected. Mm-hmm. And when he came out of prison, extraordinarily, it hadn't affected his reputation at all. All his clients stayed loyal to him, and he went on to make quite a lot more money.
Amazing story, a real survivor, that guy.
Well, his reputation was affected to a degree because I think it was in 2012, as recently as 2012, he got involved in sponsoring a French driver to race in the Indy 500, so on the other side of the pond. And the team initially accepted the money, and then the publicity that went with it was not enough, so they took it away. And he's still very successful. He's still alive, so I have to be careful what I say. And he races classic Porsches.
Right. Yeah, certainly another story of keeping his career going despite those kinds of events.
Yeah.
So we've had a robbery, a couple of murders. So let's go on and look at a fraud. And coming back to these shores now, the famous Ferrari fraud, or as you call it in the book, the Lord and the Ferrari fraud, Lord Brocket. Some of you may well remember that. Some people nodding, you remember that story. So do you want to take us there? How did he find himself in the position that he had to do the insurance fraud?
Charlie Brocket, to his mates, and I'm obviously a mate of his now, so inherited Brocket Hall up in Hertfordshire in the early 80s, and it was pretty run down, and he wasn't, he'd eaten, educated, been in the Guards, came out, inherited this pile, and to his credit, decided to sweat the asset and make it work. So he turned it into a conference centre, which was particularly favoured by the Americans. And Victor Gauntlet, who some of you may remember the name of, who was one stage absolutely owned Aston Martin and owned Pace Petroleum, and he arranged a corporate Aston Martin do up there, and Brocket made the connection that people were interested in cars. He'd started buying very piecemeal just because he was interested, a couple of old Ferraris, nothing very special, and some of the Aston Martin guests heard he had cars in a shed and came and looked at them, and that evolved into, he thought, I've made this place into a conference centre. It by that time had a couple of golf courses and was really quite a successful business. And he started buying cars at pretty low prices. He employed a former racing driver, a 500cc racing driver called Jim Bossito, who was a crook in his own right. But Jim bought these cars for the Brocket collection. They made a proper shed, and they used it as an attraction. So people would come to play golf, whatever, and then they could pay to go around the museum, which got up to about 40 cars at one stage. And the cars got more and more expensive. They bought well. This is in the 80s, remember, where you could still buy, and the market was going very nicely up, certainly till the late 80s, even early 90s. And his bank the bank manager decided it's a fantastic business. Yeah. And they lent him, as did many banks at that time, but this was on a bigger scale. They lent him too much money. He went off and bought more cars. He went over to the States with Jim Basita, bought all these cars.
Worth mentioning, it was like 5 million. They said, here's 5 million, go away and buy some Ferraris. I mean, it just seems incredible compared to what banks would do these days.
Absolutely. It was extraordinary. Anyway, so he did that, and then, of course, two things happened. One thing, the main thing happened was the economy crashed. And part of the reason for that was because of the Iran-Iraq war, the Iraqi war. And what that meant was the Americans suddenly stopped traveling. So the conference center had been very popular with Americans, and the business just dried up. So that was the problem. And to keep it going, he told his mechanic, his two mechanics, and Jim Basito, and his wife, critically, that there was a cash flow problem, a shortfall, and it was actually about 5 million quid. And the interest rates, of course, at the same time, I should have said, were spiraling. If anyone was around those days, I remember having a mortgage at about 18%. It was scary, scary stuff. And they couldn't meet their interest payments, and they needed, long story short, this shortfall of about 5 million quid. So they decided that they would take some of the less important cars out of the collection and fake robbery. And again, there are quite a few misconceptions about this. I think
one of the popular stories was that they buried them, but that wasn't true.
You're absolutely right, Harry. So the main things that the Daily Express and whatever came out with was one car was buried under one of the golf courses, another one was sunk at the bottom of the lake. None of that was true. What actually happened is that they took one car had a very dodgy, but some of them were steel body. They got rid of those. Some of them weren't completely right, but one had a Fangio connection, so it was an important car. Brocket was very keen. He understood their value as, forget the financial value, but the value of them as works of art, and was insistent they weren't destroyed. But they weren't buried. They weren't sunk at the bottom of the lake. They were actually deconstructed or disassembled and put in a shipping container on the side of the A40. Not so exciting. Anyway, and the story goes on. So as we all know, if anybody's ever made an insurance claim, and I'm sure we all have, one thing is the insurance company will do absolutely what they can not to pay.
But it seems to me that, from reading the story, how was it ever going to work? Because there was no obvious signs of a break-in.
You're right.
There was a security system there. Right. And, surely the insurance company is going to say, well, show us the evidence of how the break-in happened.
You're completely right. It's a shed on a big estate. You're quite right. It was very secure. The estate was secure. The building was secure, and I think you're right, there was no sign of break-in. So they were incredibly naive. And Charlie Brocket is a lovely guy, even though he's got a criminal record, but he's not very bright. And his employees were being deferential to him. So it wasn't that well.
They were well paid as part of the deal, of course.
They were well paid. One wanted 20 grand for his part in it, and the other guy wanted to buy his dream car, which is, so the price went up to 40 grand for a Porsche. But the loose cannon was none of those people. It was his wife. So you're quite right. The police investigated it and were very dubious about there being a break-in. The insurance company were licking their lips, saying, well, we don't have to pay out. In the meantime, the bank realised that they had effectively killed a golden goose. And they offered him an amazing loan, interest-free for 12 years, on the basis that the occupancy rate for Brocket Hall only had to be 10%, which is really easy. So he took that, at which point realised he didn't need to make the insurance claim. So the critical thing is he never, ever got a penny for it.
He never got any money.
Really importantly. In the meantime, his lawyer, like a little terrier, said, no, we're going to take the insurance company to court. The insurance company said, take us to court, but we want a surety. We want assurance and a surety that you can afford to pay I think it was 850 grand, quite a lot of money in those days. We want proof that you can pay the...
In the event that he lost.
In the event that he lost.
That would be their costs,
So he can go to the bank, who just upped his mortgage, say, because they weren't going to pay for that. So he tried to withdraw the claim, which in itself arose suspicion. In the meantime,
but on the other hand, it was a kind of a neat exit from it at the same time.
It would have been and should have been, were it not for one thing, which is his wife. His wife was an American model who his family were not happy about him marrying anyway. And she was a druggie. And she was not just addicted to drugs, but amphetamines and prescription painkillers. And she would go down to Welwyn, which is near to the Brocket estate, and literally, first of all, she'd go to a hotel. And if you go to a hotel, check into a hotel, and you want painkillers, the hotel doctor will sign them off. You're temporary resident. So she did that too many times, and they stopped doing it. They rumbled it. She'd then go down to local pharmacies and duplicate prescriptions, and she got caught. And she was called in by the police, and I can't do the American accent properly, but said, do you know who I am? And she said, yeah, we know who you are, Lady Brocket. And she called the chief of police in and said, yes, we know exactly who you are. And she basically said, you can't arrest me, it's Charles you should be after.
Yeah,
and blew the whole thing.
Blew the whole thing.
And that's how Brocket came down.
Yeah. So he went down basically for an attempted fraud, because as you said, he never actually got any money, and was jailed. And as a member of the aristocracy, I think he had a pretty rough time in jail.
He did, yeah, and got moved around, I think, 7 times, and was beaten up.
5 years, I think he got. Yeah,
he served 5 years, but he was originally done for all that. But so he had a very tough time. He had the wrong voice, the wrong background, and there was also a side story of Jim Basito, going back to the 500cc racer, was murdered on Brocket's property. He lived in a glorified porter cabin and kept a gun by his bed for whatever reason, but it transpired that he had been ripping Brocket off. He had been buying a car for 25 grand and selling it to Brocket for 50 grand, and so on. So he was also responsible for a fraud that Brocket got genuinely through no fault of his own, got him embroiled with, and that was part of what the sentence was for. So.
Yeah. And his sidekick, the guy buying the cars, it's interesting. They found one bank account with 25 grand or something in it, but his fraud was way above that. So that money's kind of lost. Nobody knows what that money is. It's sitting in lost bank accounts.
That was Jim Basito.
Yeah, Jim Basito. Yeah.
So he was a guy who feigned penury and very unfortunate.
Yeah. So recently, Crispian, I had my first run in a Delorean, which obviously have a certain emotional connection to, since they were built in Northern Ireland, which sort of leads us nicely on to Colin Chapman and Delorean story. So do you want to take us through what happened there? John Delorean, as we know, had the dream of building this amazing supercar, approaches Colin Chapman to design it.
Yep.
So far, so good. Seems like a sensible way, but of course
everybody, I'm sure, knows who Colin Chapman is.
I'm sure
hopefully, Dorian, one of the most important people in British motor racing, founded Lotus Cars, had an immensely successful Formula One team with world champions like Jim Clark, Mario Andretti. Who have I missed out? Someone. Jochen Rindt. Lots of the top preeminent Formula One team, but by the early 80s he was struggling, and he employed a lifelong and very loyal friend called Fred Bushell, who was the finance director, to whom he said, your job, Fred, is to find me the money so I can spend it.
Yeah.
And Fred Bushell, who was a good guy, but clearly compliant in what subsequently happened, would move money around. The Lotus Cars accounts were 6 months apart from the F1 team, and he'd move money from A to B. It's like moving deck chairs around on the Titanic. By the early 80s, there were lots of problems going. Chapman had a great appetite for spending money. He was involved in aviation, he was involved in nautical projects. He had a lot going on. He was also addicted to amphetamines, and not in a good way health-wise. John Delorean came from they were quite similar in terms of backgrounds. They both came from pretty humble beginnings. John Delorean's father was a drug addict and beat his children up. Went on his first crime he got away with was Yellow Pages, which they had in the States, and he set up a company with an identical name, cut out all the Yellow Pages adverts, and sent them to the advertisers, asking for them to renew their subscription. It's very cool. And he got away with that. And this is early on, didn't get sued by Yellow Pages, was brought up in Motor City, Detroit, ultimately ended up getting some very good jobs in Motor City. He'd in the meantime, become a life insurance salesman, learnt his selling skills, and was really very successful. And got slightly too big for his boots, to the point that he was fired by the Americans, by which time he had, as Harry said, this dream of making a Porsche Beta. That was his idea. And if you've ever seen a DeLorean, I've never even sat in one, let alone drive one, but the idea was to make this thing out of stainless steel. It would be high-tech. It would have gull-wing doors. So he went to... he raised some capital from friends and family. He was quite wealthy himself by that time, but needed much more money. Had to deliver the project very quickly, so he went to Porsche, actually, ironically, and they said, no, we need $70 million, and it'll take 7 years. Went to BMW, said $5 million, and 5 years, but they weren't really interested. And then, just per chance, went to Lotus. And as I said earlier, they were in dire straits. Fred Bushell said, yeah, we'll do it. We'll do it on a consultancy basis for $17.5 million, provided it's paid into an offshore Swiss bank account. And that's what happened. And in the meantime, Delorean went to the British government. Northern Ireland, as you all know very well, was in a time of strife and high unemployment, and he sold to the Labour Party, I might add, this concept that we will create new employment, we'll bring the Catholics in, as part of it, we'll bring the Catholics and Protestants together. And he was a good salesman, snake oil salesman, and he did it. Anyway, put money in, and what ultimately happened was that.
And it was a completely new build factory in
new technology. The cars he promised they would sell 30,000 units a year. They sold and that at 10,000 units they would break even. So in other words, any car over 10,000 units would be making lots of profit. In the end, they sold 9,000 units in total, of which 3,000 remained unsold. It's probably one of the ones you drove.
But it was a terrible car. I mean, it was nowhere near.
By the time it came out, going back, Chapman and Delorean were, as I say, similar sort of backgrounds. They'd both come up from nothing, made lots of money, but they were similar personalities, and they clashed. And one of the things that Chapman didn't like about the concept were two things, actually. One was that if it overturned, from a safety aspect, people couldn't get out. Secondly, was being American, Delorean. And everyone plays golf now, but Delorean insisted that behind the seats there was enough space for golf clubs instead of golf clubs, which upset the balance from Chapman, who's a purist engineer. It meant that it couldn't be properly mid-engine. The net result that came out, it was not a stainless steel body. It was a plastic body covered in stainless steel. Am I right?
Yeah.
Covered in stainless steel, which was incredibly impractical. You literally just put your finger on it and you get a thumbprint on it. They were withdrawn from the US dealership because they weren't fit for purpose.
Yeah, they lacked power as well.
They ended up with the Renault engine as well. So it was a sort of a very cheap version of the Lotus Esprit. Didn't look as pretty, didn't go as well, didn't hold the road, and was a piece of shit. Excuse my French. In the meantime, Delorean was living the high life. So he was living in a 22-room New York penthouse. He had a huge country mansion. He owned an avocado farm, and whilst Chapman already had a sort of not quite private jet lifestyle, but obviously as head honcho at Lotus and the Formula One team, had a pretty good lifestyle, but they were, as I said earlier, desperately short of money, and Fred Bushell, the FD finance director, moved it around on their behalf. Long story short, Delorean went into, so by that time Margaret Thatcher was in power and was not going to throw more. It had cost British taxpayers £80 million, pounds by then, and she was not going to add. She'd just come into power. She was not going to add another 30 million, throwing good money after bad. So net result was that DMC, Delorean, went under. In the meantime, the FBI in the States, by which time Delorean was also on drugs and becoming short of cash, the FBI arranged a sting in a hotel room where he was caught on camera dealing with an FBI agent, posing as a drug dealer in cocaine with a street value of 24 million, for which you would think he'd go under.
Yeah,
but he didn't.
He was another survivor, wasn't
Amazingly, he didn't. Yeah. He argued he was never convicted, and his lawyers argued that the FBI had acted illegally, so he got away with that extraordinarily. Yeah. But in the meantime, and a series of other misdemeanors, he never went to prison. He went bankrupt, I think, personally bankrupt in 1999. In the meantime, before that, going back to the 80s, Chapman, as I said, was in a very poor state of mental health, and supposedly.
We'll come back to that.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay. I'll let you. But okay,
he died. He died.
He came back from an FIA meeting in Paris, and he flew his own aircraft, Cessna. I'm not sure what it was, and supposedly died
of a heart attack.
Of a heart attack, age 52, in his wife's arms, his wife Hazel's arms. So. Are you going to prompt me on something else now, or not?
Well, let's just maybe we've just finished the prosecution side of things, because of course all the payments to Switzerland and everything that all came out after his death.
I thought you said prostitution. You meant prosecution.
Yeah.
Yeah, prosecution. No.
Yeah. Prosecution, not prostitution.
That sounds quite similar.
Family show.
Sorry.
Yeah. So the prosecution. So let's just follow that one through, because the net was closing on him at the time of his untimely heart attack.
But the figure I mentioned earlier on, and there was more, but the figure I mentioned earlier on was 17.6 million, which Chapman, and that went to a subsidiary company called GPD, which is a Swiss company, which they'd originally established to pay the F1 drivers, so they could pay them offshore and not pay tax or anything. That then turned into, GPD was then used for different reasons, and as I say, was the beneficiary of this amount of money, which Chapman completely denied ever receiving. And Bushell, being his loyal lieutenant, denied it as well. There was a lot more money involved in that, but there was
But Bushell was prosecuted then, and he was then jailed.
That came later. That's almost should have been a chapter in itself.
Yeah.
Certainly should have been a sidebar, but my editor.
The judge in the case certainly said that if Chapman had still been alive, he would certainly have gone to jail.
Absolutely right. So later, after Chapman had died, disappeared, and it is Bernie Ecclestone who, if you ask Bernie Ecclestone, will never refer to Chapman dying. Never. He always says disappeared. Yep. Well, I know what you're going to come to. But what happened was Chapman was then out of the picture. It was proven that Fred Bushell was complicit in moving money around. It was also proven that Lotus did receive some of that money, but not all of it, and the rest is unaccountable. So Fred Bushell goes down. By that time, in Chapman's absence, I use the word advisedly, had become chairman and ran the company. He was then prosecuted, I think, in 89,
something like that,
and went down, as you say, for 6 years. Well, he originally had a sentence, and if he couldn't repay some of the costs of $1.5 million, which he couldn't, he'd go down for another year. So he went down, and he never, ever, literally, even to the day he died, never blew the whistle on Chapman. He accepted culpability.
So what we've been sort of alluding to and sort of teasing you all about a little bit is that it's not in the book, but the rumours that I heard at the time and subsequently were that Colin Chapman was not dead. He did not die of a heart attack in 1982. He fled to Brazil. Anybody else heard that story? He had contacts with through Brazilian racing drivers, and he.
Well, I have it on good authority. Bear in mind, news in the 80s travelled a lot slower than it does now, okay? So we didn't have the internet, and I can't tell you who it is, but someone who worked for Bernie Ecclestone again, on the F1 team, and at that time was still involved in Formula One, saw him not on the grid in Brazil, but saw him in not a hospitality unit, but very near to the pits. And that I've been told that story several times by two different people, one of them being that individual, and a third person, and I can't mention his name or the driver. You'll have to use your imagination. But not the driver at the time, but someone who had driven for Chapman, very well-known guy, said, it would be teasing you to tell you what nationality he is, but said he saw Chapman in 82, 83, whatever, 83 I think it was.
Okay. I mean, he couldn't still be alive. I don't think he'd
he could be, but he'd be 100 and something.
He'd be over 100, yeah.
So, and Hazel, who I met several times through my motor racing, is now died as well. I had to be careful because Clive Chapman is still very much around and is a good guy and embarrassed by everything.
Well, I spoke about that case to a doctor friend of mine, and I always sort of dismissed it because surely there's a death certificate, and a doctor would sign a death certificate saying he had a heart attack. But I asked my doctor friend, I said, are there bent doctors out there? And he said, absolutely there are. It actually wouldn't be that difficult to get a bent doctor to sign a fake death certificate.
Well, money talks, so that's I think not a problem. I think the biggest issue is they did have a funeral.
Yeah.
But did they just bury a load of rocks, or one they'd found by the side of the road? I don't know.
I mean, assuming he is dead, of course, the story could be told, and maybe one day the story will be told. Who knows?
Well, Clive can't sue me because
we're not talking about Clive.
We're not exactly. So.
Yeah. So bringing things up to closer to the present and looking at a different motor racing series. The name of Vic Lee, a British Touring Car Championship. Yeah, a few people are acknowledging that one. Vic Lee, again, from relatively humble background, rapidly built up a very successful British touring car team. And one of his drivers, I think it was Steve Soper, said that it appeared that in the team that money was no object. Whatever the team needed for success, Vic would buy the kit for the car. But of course, there was a reason that there was a fairly endless supply of money in that particular team.
Well, I've spoken to Steve Soper many times, and seen him at Goodwood and had conversations. And when I was researching, but he didn't have a bad word to say about Vic. And absolutely to your point, money was no object, and the reason for that was, as I'm sure you all know, a very well-known story. But for those who don't, was so a British touring car team. It does what it says on the tin. British touring cars did not race overseas.
Yes, but had a particular habit of testing at Zandvoort.
His team had a habit of going over to Zandvoort.
Of course, it's in Holland.
The drug capital of Europe. And bear in mind that VLM, Vic Lee Motorsport, were based pretty near Brands House. So if you're going to go testing in the days before testing was restricted, you go to your local circuit, wouldn't you? Not to Zandvoort. Anyway, this truck would, or Snet, yeah. Brands is nice. But so this truck would go out regularly to Zandvoort, and they'd go through the motions and set up a test team, and with the awning and everything, and poodle the car, the M3s around there. But there was an eagle-eyed marshal, and everyone here will know marshals are enthusiasts like all of us, and they work, put their spare time in. But this guy was a customs officer, and
I think it's fascinating how he got caught. It's a terrific story.
Couldn't understand why VLM were going backwards and forwards to the Hook of Holland area, and that was the genesis of how they got caught. And they were cutting oxyacetylene bottles in half and filling them up with Coke. They also had, not in the belly lockers, some people say it was belly lockers, they had roof panels in the truck. And again, long story short, Vic was actually in the middle. He was back at base and had BMW executives in his office working on him becoming the works BMW team for the following season. And the boys in blue turned up, or customs officers turned up, and Vic excused himself and went back and said, "I'm really sorry. I'm being investigated for a VAT fraud." And the Germans thought that was great. They thought it was completely fine. No, it wasn't a VAT fraud. And long story short, he goes down for 12 years, comes out after 6, but the going rate these days, gets straight back into touring car racing. So he'd sold the assets of the team to Matt Neal's father, Steve Neal, which was the genesis of the team dynamics that only a couple of years ago was still operating. Vic comes out and starts managing that team. Then moves on to Peugeot, starts managing a team for them, and had become very friendly with a guy called Jerry Marnie, who was also a touring car driver, famous for two things, but in motorsport terms, he was a very big man, couldn't drive single-seaters, but extraordinarily, in the era of Ford Sierra Cosworth, won his first ever touring car race. It's a race of attrition, but he won it. Anyway, he never won anything again, and subsequently decided he wasn't a very good driver, so he went into corporate hospitality, which befitted his physique, and ran quite a successful company called the Paddock Club. But they had become very friendly with Vic. Anyway, Vic had now been out of prison for a while, and again another sting, was caught. Again, BMW M3 plays a part in it because they were driving BMW M3s in the car park, and with his mate Jerry Marnie, and the police found huge amounts of cash, and there was a drug transaction going on. The dealer actually got away, but both Vic and Jerry went down, quite rightly. Jerry went down, even though he already had a previous conviction for exactly the same thing, went down for the same period of time, came out, or went to 4 days from prison, actually, for the latter part of his sentence, at which point he started getting work employment for a company called Corbo, who make racing seats, which he then became managing director of, and now owns.
Right.
And is seriously, and is a very respectable member of society.
I was actually on their website the other day, actually looking at racing seats, Corbo seats, and I'd forgotten that Vic Lee was now the.
Can I just add one thing? So Vic was one of the guys. So I wrote this book. I'd been working on it before, but when Boris Johnson closed us down in March 2020 for COVID, it was the ideal opportunity to write it because the children were back home, getting in the way and whatever. I decided to put pen to paper. And COVID helped me because, and I said it to someone at the table earlier on, but it helped because it meant I didn't have to travel all over the country or world or whatever, because I wasn't allowed to. So an awful lot of it was done on telephone or on Zoom calls or whatever. And Vic Lee was one of the guys I just could not get hold of. I mean, should have been easy as hell. Corbo, they're in the phone directory. He wouldn't answer, or the secretary wouldn't put me through, or the secretary would, whatever. And this went on for 6 months, and I'd written him stuff, and nothing. So I tried again for the umpteenth time, and one day he picked the phone up directly. And I said, "I'm Crispian Besley, I'm doing something. I know who you are." And he'd done DD on me, and made it very clear I wasn't an investigative journalist. And he literally, from that moment on, sung like a canary, no pun intended, and was fantastic. But he maintains to this day, the first time he was guilty of sin, the second time it was a setup, and he was just helping his mate. Was
the under observation of the story I heard was that the police, having been convicted once, the idea of somebody getting into the habit, if you like, of being a drug dealer and being caught a second time, it happens quite often, and the police actually put him under observation. That was the story that I heard.
You are right. He was under observation, which is why they got him for sure. Yeah. I'm not sure that he'd been under observation in between times. Yeah. There'd been a tip-off. Yeah. So Jerry Marnie, who's now a born-again goodie, I've spoken to him. He's one person. One of the people I was warned off talking to was him, and I did talk to him, and he was fine. But he, at the time, was not a very nice man, and I think it was the police had made connections between Marnie and Lee, so he was under observation. Yeah.
So if we go to modern Formula One, I wonder how many people know that a present-day Formula One team owner has actually done time in prison as well. I'm referring, of course, to Gene Haas, the owner of the Haas Formula One team. Everybody knows he's been to prison. Do you want to get us going on the Gene Haas story?
Haas, again, a guy who had come from very humble beginnings and has built up this incredibly successful business, Haas so CNCs, which are computer numerically controlled machines, had built it into this huge business. He now owns, or at the time owned, one of the biggest NASCAR teams. But he had a problem with the tax authorities whereby he lost, I think it was $8.9 million through an IP.
Well, he had a lost court case, which he blamed on the government.
And he blamed that on, exactly. He blamed that on the government, and very ill-advisedly decided he would get vengeance from them. He would want to win his $8.9 million back, plus $8.9 million to punish the government. And he, although the finance director changed, that they were both complicit in it, and they orchestrated a massive tax fraud, creating fake invoices with two main customers who were also complicit. So they would give 98% of the invoice billing back to them. So they take a 2% margin. Quite a lot of money. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And he got found out in short time. So and ultimately it cost him, I think the authorities reckoned it had cost them $35 million, and he had to repay that. He had a $5 million fine, and then another $13 million by way of restitution for lost tax revenue and interest payments and whatever. So actually, it cost him a total of $70 million. Yeah. And in the meantime, to your point, he went to prison.
Yeah.
And was
2 years, I think.
For 2 years, served less than 2 years. And the best thing he did during that time was to persuade, and NASCAR is not my area of expertise, but he persuaded one of the leading NASCAR drivers at the time, Tony Stewart, to come across to his team, for which he gave him equity, so he gave him a share of the team. And that turned out to be very successful. The Haas Formula One team, as everyone will know, has been less so. But, anyway.
Albeit doing a bit better than they had previous seasons. Yeah, they are.
Well, most importantly, you bear in mind that the franchise value of a Formula One team is now over $1 billion. As an investment, he hasn't done too badly.
Yeah, so, absolutely, yeah.
And he's still offsetting, don't forget, the sponsorship against expenses. So it's not costing him, he's still getting his own back on the revenue.
Yeah. I liked your analogy with him and Colin Vandervelde. It was a sort of a similar thing, that he was promoting his products through building a race team under his own name. It's sort of a similar modern day version.
Not Colin Vandervelde, you mean Tony Vandervelde.
Colin
Vandervelde was his son.
His son, who
is in the book as a sidebar.
Yeah.
You may have got that's under V. So no, and he was kidnapped.
Yes.
He was a very his father, Tony Vandervelde, did not want his son going into motor racing, but he did, against his better judgment. Tony then died, and Colin is a very eccentric guy, but he'd turn up to races. He was racing Formula 3 at the time, and would turn up wearing his baggy old green corduroys and a race suit over it, and race in his school socks with his school tapes in it. And he was quite a good Formula 3 driver. He was a good touring car driver, and then just stopped. But the point of mentioning him is that he was kidnapped from school. He was at Stowe School, very close to Silverstone, actually, and was kidnapped. But won't talk about it, but he was.
And did they pay the ransom?
There was no ransom asked. And Tony was still alive then.
Yeah.
And Tony was an industrialist who almost certainly wouldn't have paid. He was dumped. He was a child. He was 14, 15 or something.
Well, if Max Verstappen got kidnapped, you can imagine it would be a pretty big news story. But there is actually precedent for that, because there was actually a reigning world champion who was actually kidnapped. So can you take us to Cuba in 1958?
So
Fangio.
At that time, in fact, for a few years before that, there was a very right-wing leadership, and the leader was a guy called Batista, and there was a huge uprising. There was a classic case of criminal rights, people being silenced or disappeared or murdered.
There was a revolution bubbling under the surface.
And there was a group of revolutionaries led by someone we all know now, Fidel Castro. And Batista had seen, it was an early case of sports washing, which we've seen so much of in today's world. It's apartheid in South Africa or China. Anyone who's got a bad track record on human rights. And he decided a good way, a really good publicity would be to have something called a Cuban Grand Prix. Not for F1 cars, this was for sports cars, although the posters show Formula 1 cars, but it was for sports cars. And it was very successful. He decided to have it in Havana, which is a sort of Monaco of the Caribbean, was at the time. They had a very successful race in 1957, and they repeated the exercise in 1958. And the star attraction, apart from Sterling Moss, was Fangio.
I was going to say there were some other big names there.
There were some great names.
Yeah.
But
Carol Shelby, Peter Collins. Yeah, a lot of the big names turned up.
Proper people, and they were attracted because, not surprisingly, the start money was very lucrative. But a group of revolutionaries working as part of Castro's team, if you like. The night before the race, there was a big dinner, a big reception. Most of the drivers were staying in the same hotel. Fangio was the most famous of them, and actually had been not only given lots of money, appearance money, but also had been given his own bodyguard. And as the drivers assembled in reception to be whisked off to dinner where they're going to, a group of these revolutionaries turned up with machine guns, and did it very subtly because there were so many people around.
Yeah.
Got Fangio into the back of a car, disarmed his own bodyguard, and took him off to a succession of safe houses. And this was very, very good publicity for them. It worked a treat. It went over all the national news wires, and it was conversely very bad news for Batista because they couldn't find the guy, they didn't know where Fangio had gone, they didn't know who had done it. So it worked absolutely as it was intended. Fangio was,
although they kidnapped him at gunpoint and so forth, it could have gone badly wrong. But once they got him into these safe houses, it all became quite amicable between him and his captors.
They absolutely. They fed him well. They gave him a TV to watch the race on, which he wasn't very. He said, I shouldn't be watching the race. I should be there. But he became really quite good friends with his, not quite Stockholm syndrome, but he understood what they were doing and why they were doing it. They were very clear they weren't going to hurt him. And he said, you don't need to point guns at me. I'm fine. I'm not doing a runner. And he was duly returned. They were worried. I think he was worried that he would be returned to the police and then they'd be in the middle of a shootout or something. A gunfight. So that he helped them arrange that he was delivered to the Argentinian ambassador. And actually went to a friend of the Argentinian ambassador's house. So it was all absolutely fine. Castro subsequently got in contact and apologised to Fangio for what he'd done and said, but when I get in, you'll be very welcome back, and you'll be. He did go back many years later, by which time he was retired, obviously, and went back as CEO of Mercedes, Argentina. But in the meantime, in the immediate aftermath of the kidnap, he went on to one of the equivalent of the Rail Letterman show, whatever it was, for which he got paid $1,000, and always joked that he was more famous in the US for the kidnap attempt than he had been for all his World Championships.
But also a little postscript to the story that when he went back to Cuba many years later, one of his kidnappers was a government minister.
Oh, right. Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah. Fantastic.
Yeah. A career change after Castro's revolution was successful, and obviously as in the way of these things swapped one dictator for another, of course. Yeah. Well, look, it's gone half past, and I think we'll leave it there for now. So, Crispian Besley, everybody, thank you very much. Besley.
Do you want me to do Q&A or not?
Yeah, we do. Sorry, I have a very good friend called Beasley, and I keep getting Beasley and Besley muddled up. Sorry about that. Have we got the microphone down there? Are there any questions for Crispian from the audience? Obviously, we could talk a long time about his fantastic stories in here.
Yeah.
So, has anybody got the mic there?
There was in the 1970s, I can't remember the guy's name, there was a British sidecar racer, 3 wheels rather than 4, who became world champion. He unfortunately went on to shoot and kill his wife and So the rumours are on the internet that he was in a gun battle with the police. I don't know if that's true, but if you look on the internet today, you find very, very little about him. Is he in your first or second volume of your books?
No, he's not. I've only written about people involved in four wheels. So no, there's, I think anybody could have written this book about, there's corruption. Unfortunately, sport is ever more now business, and there's money involved. And, you look at the obvious sports where there's corruption, greyhound racing, horse racing, boxing, and also particularly motorcycle racing. And there are quite a few stories I know of in the motorcycle world. So if there's anybody here who wants to write a book, use the same format, but write it about motorcyclists. There's a lot of dirty money there as well. But the answer to your question, I'm sorry, no, I don't know that story, and I haven't written about it because it didn't qualify.
We've got a question, Chris, here just in the front row, if you want, just on this side here.
Thanks, Crispian. Fantastic talk tonight. I'm presuming you're following the william story of William Oakes quite closely.
Of which?
William Oakes, whose brother Ollie stepped down as team principal.
He was the Alpine,
sorry,
Alpine team principal.
Yeah, I know exactly who he is. I have to be careful what I say, because he hasn't been convicted. So he was picked up. So for those of you who don't know, Ollie Oakes ran with his brother William the high-tech Formula 2 team. Ollie himself was actually quite a good driver and arguably was an even better team manager. And he was recruited only last year, I think, into Alpine Formula 1. And after one of the Grand Prix earlier this year, resigned very suddenly and didn't even go back to the UK. He went straight to Dubai. His brother, the reason being is because his brother was apprehended very near to this high-tech motorsport who were based at Silverstone and we were checking this earlier on. I've heard a much bigger number, but originally the police said it was just a very large quantity of cash. The number they've now applied to it, my friend who's here somewhere checked it on ChatGPT, it was about 850, how much? 885, I was going to say 85, whatever. I had heard it was several times that amount, but whatever. It's a very large amount of money, to be carrying around in your car if you're just going out grocery shopping. So they've been tipped off for sure. And the connection is that Nikita Marzipan's father, Dmitry, has a shareholding in Alpine. So people are joining two and two up. There's no question he'd been, I can't prove it, but that he had been part of the high-tech team. Sorry, part of the transactions had been money laundering. So that's what the police are trying to prove. But nothing's been proven yet. So It won't be in the book until something's been proven. But it is, Ollie Oakes, is he guilty? Is he guilty by association? We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah. Certainly the strong Russian connection, as you say, is what everybody's talking about.
So, which is why I'm quite happy talking about it. Because
question here from Gareth.
Evening, Crispian. As you know, we did the BMTV interview a year back or so. Just firstly, I'd like to make an observation, really. I thought your telling of the Ruth Ellis story was far more sympathetic than the fairly recent TV series, which I didn't think really portrayed her as a particularly victim, really. But I thought your story was very good. But my question was, you've hinted at it, there's a second volume, is there? When can we expect that? And can you whet our appetite with a few tasters of what's likely to be in there?
The honest answer is, so I'm not an author, by the way. I've written a couple of books, and that was the first one I've written, but I don't consider myself to be an author, just someone who writes things on bits of paper. But what I can tell you, if anybody else has written a book, is it takes a bloody long time. So the answer to your question, and I've got other projects on anyway, is it probably won't be for another couple of years. So I'm assimilating, and I've got most of them in my head. My concern is that, so that book has got, I think it's 65 chapters, so 65 standalone stories, plus there are another 25 odd sidebars. So there's essentially not far short of 100 stories. Volume 2, if I put it on paper today, would be nearer 60 stories in total. And I don't think that's enough. But in answer to your question, so give it another couple of years and we'll know more about the Oakses.
And a few months ago, we had Ian Flux here.
So Ian, I know, obviously. So,
I'm guessing Ian.
Ian could have been. I've known Ian since he was a Formula 3 driver in the 70s, and you know, if you know about Ian, you know his background. You know, he, in his public knowledge, he wrote it in his own book.
Yeah, well, we are a family show, so we'll.
Okay.
Well, we'll not.
Everyone's over 18. Anyway,
well,
so
it's early.
Okay, so
we're on TV as well. So.
Sure. Okay.
Anyway, it'll be giving away. Wait for the book.
Fluxy will be. So Fluxy is one. Just as an example, there'll be a chapter on him, and he's very, very happy for me to do that. So he did get a criminal conviction for a subject we won't mention. Ecclestone, I alluded to earlier on. That's one of the biggest criticisms of this book is, as I said earlier, why isn't there a chapter on Ecclestone? Well, there sort of is if you read the Gerhard Grabowski one, but for sure as hell there will be. Dead or alive, I don't mind if he's alive and wants to sue me. There will be a chapter on him. I don't want to give too many away, but there are a lot of quite juicy things. Carlos Ghosn, who was the head of Nissan and Renault, who I met through my business career years ago in Japan, ironically, which is where he absconded from.
Yeah, great
you know, in a violin case. You know, so that's a good story. Again, fairly well known, but there's a lot more. And I guess you know that you could argue. Horner has not been convicted. The girl, I recognise it's a family show. The girl concerned, the complainant, went to appeal, lost the appeal. But mud sticks, which is one of the reasons why Christian Horner has lost his job. I'd love to write about that because I've got lots of information on it. But I'm not a judge or jury. It's not my place to be that. But you know those are some of the more obvious ones that might appear. But there are lots more, and I'm probably not going to tell you who they are now.
And you of course you know Tom Rubith in the Business F1 magazine.
I know Tom very well.
Yeah.
He lives very near me.
A source of some material.
Yeah, an awful lot of what Tom writes is complete crap. But but he you know he's a bit older than me, and he's got lots of he has a good track record and very good connection. So Tom serialized. So Business F1 I think has been out of print now for a year.
I think they're going back. I think they're
it's gone back online.
Restarting now.
Yeah, but because Tom has been sued more times than anybody I know.
He knew the first names of all the libel judges at the High Court.
He did, yeah.
Yeah.
He's an extraordinary character, but he's a good sort. And actually, they printed. They did in whatever year it was. I can't remember. They serialized 3 or 4 stories. One of which was Didier Carmel's actually.
Yes.
And one was funny enough was Gene Haas.
Yeah.
I can't remember what the other one was. But the other one was about the Scottish Island. But anyway, so I haven't really answered your question, but.
Lots of material. Any other questions? Got a question over here?
But actually, if there's anybody here, by the way, and I really respect the gentleman over there who mentioned the sidecar guy, please don't be afraid of giving me ideas because I need some more. That book I did. So
it's published by Evro, so I guess can we contact
Evro
through the publisher then?
Yeah, but I'm really open to. You can contact me through, or Harry or whatever. I'm really open to new ideas. So those stories, I knew 99% of them. One of them I didn't know. I got from a very well-known motor racing journalist. That's the one that you and I have discussed. Was Colin Lees, who I knew from Formula 4 days, followed. But there are a few stories in that book that, if you're going to buy it at all, if you haven't already bought it. But that's one of the stories you should read.
Sure.
Anyway.
So another question, I think, over here.
Hello. Do you think that the Williams team got away and Frank Williams got away light with the death of Ayrton Senna?
In Italy, they have a very strange attitude. Someone has to be culpable for a death. And Lotus went through that in 1970 when Jochen Rindt was killed at Monza, and the team literally got the hell out of Italy as soon as they could. And the following year didn't enter the Italian Grand Prix as Team Lotus. It was entered under World Racing or something because of the potential culpability. The Williams story of Senna doesn't really, I don't consider to be part of my remit. Did they get away with it? You know, my view that's a racing accident, and it was proven well.
And it was litigated for years in Italy, wasn't it? You know,
absolutely.
And concluded.
I don't think it, unless there was a criminal charge brought and proven, it doesn't qualify for that book. Do I think they got away with it? I think it was. I've raced cars for years, and I was racing that day at Brands Hatch. It was one of the saddest days after Roland Ratzenberger had been killed the day before. And the atmosphere when I was racing was just awful. It was on TV.
I remember that myself.
But I put it down to racing accident. And
Just wondered if you could tell us a little bit about your own racing career.
It's not that interesting. So I did a bit of Formula Ford. So I was at school. Although James Hunt was much older than me, I was at school. He had some much younger brothers, and we were at the same school. And we started karting together in 1976, the year that Hunt won the championship. I was older than his youngest brother, David, 1 year older. And I left school determined to be the next James Hunt. And I milked my association with James Hunt and the Hunt family, who I knew pretty well, like you wouldn't believe. And David, my mate, was so angry because he was still incarcerated at school, and I was going out saying, you know, I know James Hunt. So I did Formula Ford and learnt about how to get publicity. And I did that, and ran out of both talent, frankly, and money, and then went and did a proper job, you know, for a while. And then restarted racing about 12 years later in contemporary Ferraris. And as I've got older, the cars have got older, so I'm now very lucky, and I race historic. So I race Formula Junior specifically, historic Formula Junior, and so does one of my sons who's here somewhere. And I've raced historic Formula 1 and historic Formula 2, but I just race for fun.
Okay, everyone. Well, it's been a very, very hot evening, so I think we'll call it quits there. So thank you very much. Another big hand for Crispian.
Hi, guys.